good. I mean, hopefully everybody right. You hear me?
Hey, bro.
Morning, guys. Good morning. How you doing? Doing good. Did you hear me? You can't hear me? Oh, okay. Yeah, hopefully it will. Okay.
You know what? Yeah, we know what.
You need.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Cook. I'm the chairman of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'd like to welcome everyone to our second day of our commission meeting. This is our full commission, so everyone will be voting and addressing these issues. And to get started off properly, I'd like to recognize Commissioner King to lead us in the invocation and the pledge.
Your word tells us that in you is all treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So we're asking for that. We need your wisdom, we need your knowledge. So I pray for our chairman as he leads the meeting. I pray for those who will be doing presentations. I pray for the audience, all of us, that we'd be quick to hear and slow to speak and do everything in your name. And just that your resources, and we want to take care of them. So again, we thank you for this place, all of our hosts. It's just been good, Lord, and we do appreciate it. We thank you so much. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner King. I'd like to recognize a few special guests. We have Cheatham County Commissioner Ed Greer with us from the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. We have Mike Butler, Mr. Kendall McCarter, and Rick Wolbert. We also have Johnny McFarland from Quail Forever, Mr. Larry Ray with Larry Ray Outdoors, and the members of the Wolf River Conservancy. So welcome to all those folks and everyone else. So if anyone would like to speak, please step to the microphone, state your name, tell us where you're from and what group you might represent. And we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. When we get to the 2-minute mark, we have 1 minute remaining. Danette will say 1 minute, and please go ahead and finish your comments so other folks will have time to speak. I'd like to thank, well, that's a good time to mention to please, that was right on. So it's usually Commissioner Box, but Commissioner Gardner? So, yeah, thanks. We'd like to thank Commissioner Cox and Cindy. We had a great meal at his house last night, and it turned into a big old hootenanny and a guitar pull with Chuck Yost on the guitar and Commissioner King's husband, Dirk, playing the piano, and Director Carter was the lead singer. So we had a great time, so thank you for that. Please call the roll.
Here. Connie King. Here. Tony Sanders.
Here.
James Stroud.
Here.
Bill Swan.
Here.
Kent Woods.
Here.
Jamie Woodson.
Here.
Brian McLaren.
Here.
Kurt Holbert. Jeff Cook.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Danette. We all received the minutes prior to the meeting, and unless someone would like to read those, do I have a motion from Commissioner Holbert? Second from Commissioner Woodson. So all in favor of approval, let me know by saying aye. Any opposed? No. They are approved. Any announcements from the Commission? Director Carter, any announcements? With that, I'll turn the meeting over to Chairman Cox. Chairman Cox for attention and recruitment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andrew Peercy with the Wildlife Federation is going to give us a review of the SCTP or JW, either one of you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is J.W. Worthen, and I'm the Director of Programs with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. And those programs include the Scholastic Clay Target Program, Hunters for the Hungry, and Hunting and Fishing Academy. It's a pleasure to be here in Memphis today. We actually look forward and asked to come to this venue this year. One reason is because Andrew couldn't decide whether we were going to Central Barbecue, the Commissary or Rendezvous, but we ended up at Central last night, and it was great. But on real hand, we had almost 20% of our participants from our SCTP program actually live right here in the confines of Memphis, so that was one of our first main reasons. Second reason is it's also home to our current chairman of the board, Rick Walbrick. Rick has been instrumental the last few years in leading the Wildlife Federation. He's also has a son in the shooting program, and he's also volunteered as a coach. And he's helped add some critical new fields out at Shelby Farms that added some much needed capacity to the Memphis area. So thank you, Rick, for coming out today in your leadership. And last but not least, we picked Memphis because it's also home to Emily Ferguson. She's a very special young lady who participates in our shooting program, and you're going to get to hear from her in a few minutes about how Tennessee SCTP has impacted her life. It's my pleasure to give you some highlights today from the 2018 Tennessee SCTP season, and one promise I'll make today is hopefully for the next 10 to 15 minutes we're going to take our minds off of CWD. But I wanted to bring that up for one specific reason, one similarity to the Tennessee Scholastic Clay Target Program. I was at the meeting last week at Bolivar, and I heard Chuck Yost make the comments that actions and decisions that are made today will shape the next 10 to 20 years. And I have to say that that is exactly the same with Tennessee SCTP. The decisions that were made and actions taken 14 years ago in 2005 between the Commission and our organization have helped shape into one of the most successful programs, if not the most successful program in the country. It's changed and impacted thousands of lives across Tennessee and created avid shotgun shooters and hunters. And our two organizations working together for positive change has never been stronger than any other time. Whether that's conservation policy, to habitat restoration, or to programs like Hunters for the Hungry or SCTP. And additionally, your decisions to fund shooting ranges across the state the last few years are now coming to fruition. Having more infrastructure around the state is critical to enabling Tennessee SCTP teams to grow and thrive and to be able to get more individuals to engage in the shooting sports. So thank you to the Commission and TWRA for the broad and steady support that has made the shooting sports and so much more flourish here in Tennessee. Our two organizations have proven the old adage, if you want to go far, you go together. I'd briefly like to recognize a few individual commissioners who have played a hands-on role in getting more kids into the shooting sports. Commissioner McLaren is a volunteer coach and a father of an athlete in the program. Commissioner Box has worked for, I think, over the last 2 seasons to try to get a head coach and get a new team started at USJ in Jackson, and I think we finally accomplished that a couple weeks ago. And I was also fortunate enough to spend a couple days with Commissioner Cox at the R3 National meeting discussing youth recruitment strategies, which is the focus of Tennessee SCTP. So thanks to each of you for your individual efforts. For those of you less familiar with the Tennessee SCTP, our athletes participate in 3 main areas. They shoot trap, skeet, and sporting clays. They're broken into 6 main age groups ranging from 9 years old to college, and they start at 9 for a specific reason, because prerequisite to that program is you have to take Hunter's Ed. To guide these athletes, we have a network of teams and coaches across the state, and these teams are sponsored by either schools or Scouts or 4-H or other local organizations. This statewide network of teams and volunteers is overseen by the hard work and dedication of our Tennessee SCTP manager, Andrew Peercy. So thank you, Andrew, for your hard work. And now I want to talk what we really came to look at and what I want you to remember from today, and that is impact. There are a number of different ways to look at and compare true impact of a program. You start asking questions like, what does success look like? You can look at outcomes and outputs, data and statistics. So that's the first one we're going to look at. These are a few key stats from the last season and since inception. We had close to 1,850 youth participate, with over 240 trained coaches and volunteers last season across 92 teams across the state. And since inception, we've had over 8,000 individual athletes participate, with over 900 individual coaches and volunteers. Those athletes and teams have won over 150 national titles during that time. Another look at impact, or we could look at how many youth from our Tennessee SCTP program took that next step and turned their passion from shooting sports into a broader interest in the great outdoors. And last season, out of our hunting and fishing academy, we took 336 youth and parents into the outdoors on hunting trips. And in the last 3 years, we've taken over 620 youth and parents into the outdoors. Now, another way to look at the program's impact is to look at how the program transforms these shy and nervous and barely able to hold the gun up and scared kids into these confident, enthusiastic mentors and advocates. It's amazing when you surround these kids with like-minded youth and trained coaches for support, amazing transformations start to take place. And that impact is not only spreading across Tennessee, but is now spreading worldwide. We have several former athletes here, as you see on the screen, that have found success in the USA shooting program. They represent the United States around the world. We currently have 5 that are going toe-to-toe with some of the best shooters in the world. Several got to spend the summer at the USA Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And they've also got to travel and represent the United States around the world in Beijing, Rio de Janeiro, Moscow, Porpet, New Delhi, and Guadalajara, to name a few. So these are lifelong shooters and advocates that came out of the Tennessee thanks to this program. And obviously some amazing accomplishments, to say the least. I can't imagine being their age and having some of those experiences. But there's also another side of impact, and that's more of a personal impact. And that's more than just success on the field. It's about how to face adversity and to be an inspiration to others and be a leader or set example for others. And I could not think of a better example of that embodies those statements more than Miss Emily Ferguson. And after hearing from her, I think you'll agree. Emily?
I would like to start by thanking the Scholastic Clay Trap program for what it has done for me, for helping me grow and flourish as a young lady, from giving me a sense of purpose to helping me find a new confidence in myself. I have become an entirely different person since I began this journey. 2 years ago, when I started high school, I discovered that my school had a trap team. On a whim, I decided to sign up for the sole reason that I thought my dad would be excited that he and I could do this together. I could not have been more right. The very next weekend, my dad took me to the trap fields to try it out, and I don't remember this, but he is adamant that I hit my first target. This program has given me a sense of purpose and direction I have never experienced before. I have an unparalleled passion for this sport and a kind of motivation to do well in it that I do not believe I would ever have had for anything. Never mind thinking that over this past summer, I would be fortunate enough to place 9th at Nationals with a score of 195 out of 200. I could not imagine that one day my parents would buy me an over-under shotgun so that I could pursue my interest in Olympic trap. I certainly did not think I would cry when I saw it. I never thought that one day I would have the opportunity to qualify for the Junior Olympics, or that I would have the chance to meet people as kind and as supportive as my coaches, Bill Quinlan, Boyd Wade, and Jim Dickerson. This program has given me a confidence in myself that I've never had before. I feel comfortable in almost everything I do because I now know that I am capable of the things I set my mind to. The people I have found myself surrounded by have been nothing short of the kindest people I could ever have hoped to meet. My coaches give me constant support and positive feedback no matter what kind of day I've had on the field. My class and teammates show me endless love. I can see a night and day difference in myself from the time I started trap to now. Not only in my shooting abilities, but also in my day-to-day life. I'm not afraid to face my future because I've been taught to believe in myself, and I've seen what I am capable of. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I warned you guys, she was amazing. There is one more photo that I wanted to share with you, though, and this is an awesome photo. It's a mother embracing her daughter after a special event. But what it doesn't show is what happened prior to this photo. The day before, she was at her doctor's office getting blood work drawn just to see if she would be able to make the trip. Luckily, the blood work came back good, and she was able, and her family drove to Marengo, Ohio. And after she got sick a couple times in the parking lot, she met her teammates on the field, or about to approach the field. And they were all complaining. It's raining. The fields are muddy. It's too windy. The kids yesterday got to shoot in the sun. And Emily did what she always did. She rallied her team with her infectious personality. She's just happy to be there. Happy to have the chance to take the field. But then she led her team out to the field, and in those conditions, as she said, she shot her personal best, 195 out of 200. You know, it's easy to get caught up, and we start losing focus of what's really important. And then you meet a young lady like Emily, and she shows you that true impact of the program. And then those same decisions and actions that we took 15 years ago and the commission helped us with are still creating those athletes like Emily across the state of Tennessee. So thank you.
Thank you, JW. I might have another question. Yes, sir. For Andy, have you got a presentation?
No.
Okay.
First, I want to thank Commissioner Cox. First, I want to thank Emily. You're quite the young lady and quite the inspiration. So, and Emily's agreed to she'll take a picture with us at the break. So
Good.
We'd love to have the picture with you if you stay around for that. Thank you.
This program was funded several years ago with hopes that with the intention that some of these young men and women would buy hunting and fishing licenses, and over time we would get our money back. Mm-hmm. Well, we probably are, but that story makes it all worth it. Let's see, I had a question for you, JW. Oh, next week there's an R3 meeting at Nashville Gun Club. Would you make that announcement, please? Or you tell us
Yes,
about
and
that
I can
just
send
for
that
a
out.
second?
We're trying to get together a few groups and organizations from across the state, whether it's Delta and WTF, Quail Limited, anyone who has youth engagement programs. And we're trying to bring them together at a round table out at the Nashville Gun Club to hear what they're currently doing around strategies around youth engagement, to just get a better idea of what the landscape looks like and try to give them an idea. And the ones that aren't as familiar with R3, we can introduce them to that and maybe even get them signed up into that R3 community where they can follow it. And it gives a lot of good good stories every week of what other states are doing. So you get to see how they're addressing kind of new groups like millennials. So it's great to hear what else is out there, because that makes us better too. And even our Hunting and Fishing Academy came from Texas. That's where I took it from, because they were already doing something great. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, we're just borrowing, and that's what R3 is really about, sharing those ideas and getting more youth into the outdoors.
All right. What time and where?
That one is at, I haven't, it's at the Nashville Gun Club.
Back porch of the Nashville Gun Club.
Yeah, I want to say it.
And I think it's at 10 o'clock.
Yeah. But I can send out, happy to send out an email to the commissioners, and we can put it in the
Probably
thing.
gotten that. I just wanted you to make that public.
I think it's this next Friday.
Right.
It's my one without checking my calendar, but I think it's next Friday.
Thank you, guys.
There you go. Noon to 3 at the Nashville Gun Club on
Thank
Friday.
you very much.
More questions?
That's it,
A bit?
unless somebody else has got a question.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I've got a follow-over from yesterday that it was in fishing, but something that Frank said in his presentation yesterday when he was talking about pay lakes struck me as an R3 perhaps opportunity, and I would like to bring it up and ask the agency. When he talked about pay lakes and the licenses that, and I asked the question in whether you have to have a license to fish a pay lake, and his recommendation was to leave it like it is. You don't have to have one. But it struck me that when he said that perhaps a mother would call the agency office and want to take their child fishing, where would they go? Well, they might send them to one of these pay lakes, and since they don't have to have a license, they go. Right now, you have to have a license to fish a private pond in Tennessee. And it seems to me that years ago we provided services and fish and technical support on site and that kind of thing. We don't do that anymore. And I just wonder if that might be an impediment that we could remove that might get more people involved. I don't know that the revenue would be, if we lost any revenue, I think it might be negligible, but not that we can change it now, but I would like to ask, with your permission, ask the fisheries guys to think about that, take a look at it, you know, maybe come back in a month or two or something, and I won't be here, but maybe you could follow up, whoever, Commissioner Holbert, and see if that might be something that you guys might take a look at. That's all I've got, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. I think it's a great suggestion, and I know Chairman Holbert will take care of it. I'd like to recognize Chairman Sanders with the Budget Committee.
You guys didn't give me much this month, so Ken, recognize Ken Tarkington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your books, and I think on your notepads, you have a 3-page financial report reporting through the month of November. And as you scan down through there, if you compare, you may see that there are several adjustments to the report for the prior months. We're constantly adjusting to try to get our revenue as straight as possible. Now, Finance and Administration, the Department of Finance and Administration closed the fiscal year 18 last week, or I guess it's week before last now, and we're in the process of working through all of those adjustments, bringing it forward. At the top of the page on the boating fund, we're showing a approximately a 7% increase over the same, a boat registration increase over the same point in time previous year in 17-18, and we've expended approximately 22% of the allotment for the year. On the wildlife portion, approximately 14% ahead of our projection for this year on license sales, and the expenses are about 28% of the allotment. At the bottom of the page, the wildlife endowment has approximately $6,200 that can be transferred with a balance of $6.5 million. And the lifetime sportsman endowment has approximately $52 million. I would like to mention, maybe at this point or later, obviously the shutdown, the federal government shutdown, is of concern. For the most part, our federal funding is still intact. It's a little bit slower in getting response. The only thing that we may have some delay in, perhaps, is the Coast Guard portion. In consultation with our federal aid chief, there doesn't seem to be any problem in receiving any of the funds. It's just on the Coast Guard side, it's just when they will come in. Top of the second page, the Wetlands Fund, the acquisition account, we have approximately $10.6 million balance. We've zeroed the maintenance fund out, as we usually do. And the compensation, or in lieu of tax, is $885,000 balance. The third page identifies our investment. Now, this is through the month of December, and we are now, if you look at the very bottom of the page, almost 2.9% increase in value since the inception, which was back in late 2015. Any questions or comments?
Do we have enough reserve to ride out the government shutdown for a?
Depends on.
As soon as I said it, I knew that was coming.
I think we do.
If normal anticipated, whatever heck normal is today. Okay. Are there any questions from the commission? Mr. Cox?
I've got a question for Director Carter. Is he here? We discussed the treasurer's report and the investment account. Are you, and I know we've gotten a comment back from him, and you don't have to answer today, but are you prepared to recommend anything today about reinvesting that money, or are you still thinking about it?
We got the reply back from the treasurer's office the day before we met here, so haven't had a really good chance to sit down and talk with them other than the response that they gave us in writing. I think there's 2 or 3 moving parts on that. One is that it's the treasurer's decision. If we decide to make that change and go from one account to the other, he would have to okay that, and it would also be a lag time there in terms of, because of selling the what would we call those? The investments, to sell those to get back, and then they don't want to make sure, they want to make sure we don't lose any money, so he wants to time that. But I'm guessing that if we make that change, that they will be reluctant to push it back again should the markets change sometime later. But I guess a long answer to your question is that we plan to go back to the treasurer and really sit down and analyze with them exactly what they think the time frame would be and what would be involved if the commission decides to make that change. So yes, sir, we're looking at that. I just don't have a good answer for you today.
Well, it seems to me that we made that different investment to try to help with the daily cash flow of the agency, and this investment vehicle has not, it's not set up for that, and we didn't really realize, I suppose, when we did it. But it seems to me like the interest rate on the SPIF account's better now, that we might, you know, it might produce $1 million a year in cash flow for us. So
it has made a difference. We know when you all made that decision, the account was .013. so it was practically nothing.
Right.
So it was no earnings. So when you moved it over, then the market's changed. Now the interest rate has gone up, so the money in the state pooled investment fund is at about 2%. So it's performing better than the investments. But
Do you think you'll have a report next month or something to recommend next month?
I think about.
Would you?
I hope that we can. Part of that's kind of outside of our authority to say anything, because it depends on what the treasurer says. But we certainly are going to try to meet through this next month to have some kind of report, and whether it be a recommendation or not, it will depend on what he tells us. But I'll certainly give you a report back on where he thinks we ought to be.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll take a motion to accept the treasurer's report. Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Did I take your job? Sorry. Chairman Cook, that's all we have.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. I'd like to recognize Chairman Stroud with the Government Relations Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. The Chair would like to recognize Chris Richardson. And these items that we're going to be dealing with are rules. So I'm going to turn this back over to you, Chairman Cook, to handle these different issues and rule votes. So, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Cook, if you want to read your introductory statement.
At this time, the Commission will engage in a rulemaking hearing on 4 rules being presented today. Each rule will be introduced into the record as it is being presented, and each rule will be acted upon separately. The Commission will remain in rulemaking hearing until all rules have been heard. My name is Jeff Cook, and I will conduct the hearing. The order of the proceedings. 1. Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency staff will present information on each rule before the Commission today. 2. Commission members will be permitted to comment and ask questions on each rule. 3. Members of the public will be permitted to comment and ask questions on each rule. 4. Staff members and members of the audience wishing to speak should identify themselves before speaking. 5. I reserve the right to limit comments and discussion to no more than 3 minutes, especially in cases of repetition.
Thank you, Chairman Cook. And the first rule that the agency has for your consideration today concerns the agency's processes for handling requests for public records. Just to give you a brief history of kind of how we got to where we are, in 2010, the Commission adopted a rule somewhat similar to the one that I'm presenting to you today that governed how we would handle those requests. In 2017, the General Assembly or the Office of the Comptroller said that perhaps we should consider adopting a model policy across all state agencies. So we repealed our original rule, adopted the model policy from the Comptroller, and moved forward. Last year, the General Assembly enacted a new public chapter that requires every state government agency to adopt a rule through a formal rulemaking process subject to approval from government operations on how we handle these requests. So we are back before you today asking you to adopt this rule. In its most basic terms, you can see the language of the rule, or at least a summary of the language of the rule on the screen. The TWRA does not limit public records requests unless we are obligated by law to do so. Some of our records are populated through the driver's license database, which is protected by law. There are also restrictions on releasing information that is part of an ongoing criminal investigation. This rule will allow clarity for the public and clear guidance for the agency on how to process these requests. They'll come into our public records request coordinator. They'll be made during normal business hours. They can be made via phone, fax, email, or web submission. We will establish the appropriate procedures within the agency. Requesters wanting copies of the records rather than inspecting in person will have to pay for those. One additional kind of piece that has been discussed through several of these other rulemaking hearings that I've watched is, are we going to allow someone to come in with a cell phone and take pictures of records as they inspect them? And we are going to allow that activity. We will not allow somebody to bring in a copy machine or something like that that might damage a record. But certainly if it's a non-invasive procedure that they want to make a copy on their own free of charge, we're going to allow that. So with that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and we ask that you adopt the rule relative to public records requests.
Thank you, Chris. Do I have a motion for approval? Motion from Commissioner Holbert. Do I have a second from Commissioner McLaren? Any discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the public? Hearing none, all in favor of approval of Rule 1660-03-02-01 pertaining to public record requests, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The rule passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second rule that I'm going to ask your consideration on today, many of you on the commission here remember when you adopted what we call the Native Tennessean Annual License. At the time of adoption of this license, the commission wanted to put this on a trial basis to evaluate whether or not it was going to cost the agency a significant sum of money to provide non-residents who were born in the state of Tennessee the ability to purchase hunting and fishing licenses at the same cost as a resident. That trial period that you put on carried with it a 3-year sunset provision. So if the commission does not take action, this license will go away effective March 1st of 2019. Basically, this is the text of the rule as it is adopted. As I said, any non-residents who can prove through a copy of their birth certificate that they were born in the state of Tennessee are currently eligible to apply for a native son designation, and then that opens up their ability to buy those hunting and fishing licenses at an annual cost. We pulled together, and a special thanks to Susie Spriggs in the licensing division who pulled these figures for me. What you are looking at here is a graph of the revenue associated with those customers that have the native son designation. If you go to the far right of the screen, the $100,118 is associated with all of the current holders of the native son designation. If you go back to 14-15, that $95,000 reflects the amount of money that those same customers that we currently have in 18 and 19 spent with the agency in 14-15. What I believe that this shows is, and you'll see more clearly on the next slide, that as a worst case proposition, the reduction in cost associated with selling non-residents, native Tennesseans, those licenses at the resident cost is attracting enough buyers, new buyers, that it is making up for any loss of revenue associated with the reduced cost. This slide shows the participation in the program. Back in 14 and 15 we had, well, actually I have to kind of explain this the backwards way. In 18-19 we now have 1,224 people that have a native son designation. If you go back to 14-15, prior to us having the native son license, of those 1,224 customers that we have purchasing licenses this year, there were only 664 of those customers that purchased a license in 14 or 15. So you can see a very sharp increase in participation of the program, and in fact, this kind of breaks it down a little more clearly. We've had 166 customers who bought the first full license year that had not purchased any license since 13-14. We have reactivated over 500 customers that had a lapse in their buying history since 2014, and we have 130 brand new customers that prior to the native son being available had never purchased any sort of license with the agency before. So certainly this hits on two of the R's in R3. It certainly shows that we're recruiting some new people through this program, and we're also reactivating some customers that had lapsed. So it is the recommendation of the agency that the commission remove the sunset provision and make this license permanently available going forward. The one additional change that I would say is the original rule required that all applicants for native son licenses be processed through the revenue division. What we would like to do is require that first-time applicants be processed through the revenue division, and then after that application is processed, we can designate that customer as a native son in our system, which would open up the ability to buy these licenses online at a license agent through the other regular means. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will be happy to answer any questions that the Commission has.
Thank you, Chris. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Approval from Commissioner Cox and a second from Commissioner Swan. My feeling is that, yes, we are losing a small bit of revenue, and I suspect, you know, as time goes by, as your graph shows, this will continue to grow. And it just is one of those things. It feels like it's part of our Tennessee culture and traditions that you come home, hunt with your families, and I think it encourages that. So I'm all for this. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, the one piece of information that I neglected to tell you on this slide, this slide reflects the revenue associated with the sale of the license. What's not captured in this slide is the federal revenue associated with those. Prior to the native son license being in place, these non-residents were all likely purchasing either a hunting license or a fishing license. Now that the resident licenses are available, they are purchasing combination licenses, which increases our federal dollars because we count them both as a hunter and a fisherman. By my last estimate, every hunter that buys a license equates to about $22 in federal revenue, and every fisherman that buys a license equates to about $6.50 of federal revenue. So I believe that it plays out, while I don't have the data mined to give you the specific figures, that any loss of revenue reflected here is more than made up for in the federal allocations.
could I ask you just as an aside to quickly explain, because I think this is going to be pertinent as we move forward with other discussions, quickly explain that the PR money is tied to license sales. And so if we don't have license sales, if we have difficulty, so if you could quickly explain where PR money comes from and
Sure.
why do license sales matter, or permits, any fees matter toward that?
Sure. There are two main programs associated with hunting and fishing: wildlife restoration funds and sport fish restoration funds. Those are collected through federal excise taxes that get paid into the federal coffers, and then the Fish and Wildlife Service allocates those dollars back to the states. It's based in part on the geographic size of a state, but it's also based in large part on how many paid license holders you have for hunting and how many paid license holders you have for fishing. So each time a person buys a license in the state of Tennessee, it means more federal dollars coming back home.
Those federal dollars come from excise taxes on products you might, outdoor hunting and fishing products.
Correct. Ammunition, guns, fishing-related equipment, those types of things.
And if, even though those things might be bought in the state of Tennessee, excise taxes were charged, if we don't have enough license sales, we don't get that money.
That's correct. Well, the portion of the money that we get is directly tied to how many licenses we sell. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So where were we? Oh, any discussion from the commission? Discussion from the public? All in favor of approval of Rule 1660-01-28.11, the native son license? All in favor, let me know by saying aye. Any opposed? The rule passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The third rule that I'm presenting to you today, 1660-02-01-.03, deals with the fees associated with the registration of motorized vessels in the state. To give you a brief history of fee adjustments, if you go way back in time, and Director Carter, who was around then, corrected me that 1969 is not the first time that fees were established, but actually 1965 fees were established in statute by the General Assembly. At that time, the fee for a one-year registration was $4. In 1969, the fee for the registration of an 18-foot boat was raised to $8 by the General Assembly, and those fees remained unchanged until 1997. In 1997, the Commission was provided the authority by the General Assembly to adjust those fees and to set those fees through rule rather than statute. In 1998, the Commission initially set the fees, and I used an 18-foot boat just as one of the, just as an example of the fees, so you could see that progression over time. Of course, there are several other fees that are associated with smaller boats and larger boats, but the Commission set the fees by rule for the first time in '98. They adjusted them again in 2008 pursuant to the CPI, which is the requirement and limitation provided in the statute for adjustment. And today's proposal in 2019 would reflect another CPI adjustment. So you can see, at least over the last, since 98, we have been consistently adjusting fees on a 10-year cycle, and we're time for that again now. That CPI as calculated by the agency is approximately 17.3% since the last time those fees were adjusted. The proposed fee schedule that you see before you now reflects an adjustment to the fee by 17.3%, then rounded down to the next whole dollar. So this would reflect the proposed new fees as this rule would provide. This graph gives you an indication, tracks the total revenues and expenditures from the boating fund. This is all revenues that are associated with the existing fee schedule. As you can see, over time, the cost of doing business reflected by the expenditures from the boating fund has increased, and the revenue from the boating fund has remained relatively the same. I would point out that you see a large spike in revenue in that last year in 2018, and that is not reflective of a whole bunch of new boat sales. That spike in revenue is associated with the agency receiving a larger portion of the marine fuel tax, or the gasoline tax collected at marinas. The gasoline tax collected at marinas was not intended to provide general operating expenses for the boating fund. It was intended and passed by the legislature to give us a way to provide more access for motorized boats, and also to do other projects like we have done with Asian carp, with new fishing piers in Henry County and Chattanooga, new boat ramps down on the Duck River. Those were the types of projects that the fuel tax was designed for. So we feel that at this time, based on the expenditures and the cost of doing business in the boating fund, the fact that it has been over a decade since these fees were adjusted, that a consumer price index adjustment to the boating fees is appropriate. We're asking for your approval today. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Do I have a motion for approval? The motion for approval from Commissioner Stroud, and second from Commissioner Holbert. Any discussion from the commission?
Chris, would you tell us what these boating fees pay for?
I'll do the best that I can. It may be a question better directed to Lieutenant Colonel or to perhaps Ed, but certainly boating fees go to pay for our officers on the water. They go to pay for access points. We build boat ramps with boating dollars. Those, I would say, were probably the two main costs, but certainly the boating program, we are charged with administering boating safety for the entire state. And we are responsible for the safety of recreational boaters on the water. These funds are directed towards those efforts.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the commission? Commissioner Gardner?
I was just wondering why the marine fuel tax is not kept in a separate account, and why is it combined? Is there a requirement legislatively, or what's the thinking behind it?
There is not, Commissioner Garner. The fact that the marine fuel tax flows into the boating fund is really a product of history and tradition. Ever since we got any portion of the fuel tax, those dollars at that time were about $500,000 a year funneled through the boating fund. When we got the allocation for the increase, the statutory provisions were not changed, and so that money just flows in there. It does not restrict our ability to spend some of those dollars on wildlife-related projects, as we've done with Asian carp. It's just a matter of transferring the money from one fund to the other. So we certainly account for them separately, and I don't see a real value or benefit to having to have a whole separate account. We can certainly break down the expenses and show that as being reflected, but just from an accounting standpoint, we have two funds, wildlife and boating, and the fuel tax is housed in the boating fund.
Chris, could we take an opportunity again to explain where does the fuel tax come from?
Sure. The we receive a portion, a very small, mathematically computed portion of the overall fuel tax generated by the state of Tennessee. That amount reflects the estimated tax that is collected at fuel sales at marinas. So that $2.8 million or so that we are receiving from fuel tax is all generated from gasoline that is going into boats at marinas.
So motorized boats buying fuel at the marina used to build boat docks.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the public? All in favor of approval of Rule 1660-02-01.0, got to back up, 3, for boat registration fee increase, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Rule passes. And if we could recess for just, let's say 15 minutes, so at 10:20 sharp, if we could get back. So I'd love to, Emily, would you take a picture with us? And then if we could start back at 10:20. Thank you. Yeah.
I think the only issue that I've seen is sometimes, like, yeah. Sometimes, like, Hey, Austin. This mic's live.
Dumb question.
Yeah, it's for, you know, moving dirt for what do you call it, levees maybe? That's what I'm thinking.
Cold water.
Yeah, exactly. The crane carries the baby ducks. And it's operated by the ducks flying.
Y'all get me out of
All right, we'll resume the rulemaking session. Chris?
Thank you, Chairman Cook. The final rule that I have before you today deals with rules and regulations governing commercial non-motorized vessel outfitters. And that's why there are several new and special guests in the room that we haven't seen at our commission meetings before. And certainly this rule has been the subject of a significant amount of discussion, both with the outfitters, within the agency, within the General Assembly. We've been talking about these rules a lot since I presented to you last on this in August. Just to kind of start and give you, this goes back to the August presentation that I made, and what is the problem that we are facing or we're looking at, and maybe I shouldn't even call it a problem, but should call it an issue. There is no doubt that the popularity of paddle sports in the state of Tennessee and nationwide has increased significantly, and that increased popularity has led to more people using our natural resources in ways that we didn't experience 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. There is a large portion of the increased traffic that's associated with commercial outfitters, and the rules that I'm going to propose to you here in just a little bit are designed in part to start to think about those issues, but also to gain some information about a group and a situation that we really haven't had a lot of experience with. The increased pressure on the resource leads to problems the agency has to deal with from a congested access standpoint, additional enforcement time for our law enforcement officers that are tasked with the safety of those recreational boaters. There are issues surrounding trespass on private property adjacent to some of our waterways, and there are concerns, rightfully so, with water quality and litter issues associated with this additional traffic. The General Assembly voted and provided the Commission with some authority to start to think about these, and the Commission now has the authority to establish rules and regulations relative to the commercial outfitters. This is the first rule that we're proposing under that new authority. To give you just a little background on the process that we have gone through to get to this point, that statutory authority became effective in July. I previewed a conceptual overview of what a rule could look like in August. We conducted a public meeting of stakeholders in October, and from that we formed a small advisory group. That small advisory group was made up of 17 individuals that included 10 outfitters, fishing guides, fishermen, landowners, paddling associations, and also representatives from TDEC and also the Department of Tourism. We held 2 lengthy meetings in person with the small advisory group that was also attended by a number of other outfitters that were not necessarily members of the group, and we had a very robust discussion surrounding what a rule could look like associated with these groups. We filed a notice of rulemaking hearing on November 21st, setting the hearing for today. Since that filing on November 21st, we have been accepting written public comments through email, which, as you know, as I've provided them to you, they were quite voluminous. Nearly 2,000 comments were received by email, which is by far and away the most public comment I have seen associated with any rule or regulation that the agency has done in my tenure. Since the rulemaking, since we filed the notice of hearing, we did not stop our discussions. I've continued to talk with these outfitters. I've continued to talk with representatives from the paddling associations. And honestly, this is somewhat of a unique rule in that the recommendation from the agency for what we would like you to pass has changed substantially since we filed the rule for hearing on November 21st. What I'd like to do Mr. Chairman, when we get to it, I'll kind of summarize these public comments, but I'm going to present the rule somewhat differently than I have in the past, in that I'm going to present the rule as we filed it, while at the same time the recommendation in the form of a red line for what we would actually like you to adopt. The public comments, general themes for support of the rule, you can see them on the screen. Many people believe that access to our waterways is become more difficult due to the congestion. They think these rules will promote the integrity of those accesses. We can also begin to protect private landowners from some of the trespass issues they're dealing with. And there is a hope that the rules we could adopt will enhance safety on the water and stewardship of commercial outfitter customers. On the opposition side, which there were several comments received in this vein, the proposed fees that we had in the original filing were excessive. There's concerns that violations of the rule result in Class C misdemeanors. There was some drafting errors, honestly, that led to some comments that said the safety briefing we're requiring should match the body of water. And there is a request for a permanent advisory committee regarding any future rulemaking on paddling. If I could touch on that just briefly, that final comment, that is something that the agency is certainly supportive of. I think that I personally learned an incredible amount through the discussions that we had with the small advisory group and also the public meetings we had with this industry. I think that a advisory committee made up of people that know paddling and know commercial outfitting, along with the safety issues and some of the national organizations, I think that is a good thing to do. But that being said, this rule is not an appropriate vessel for which to form that committee. So I don't want the last comment there to appear to have gone unnoticed, but because of the scope of the rule as we filed it in November 21st, and also some of the thoughts on how that group should be formed, this today is not an appropriate time to take on that action, but it's certainly something we want to do. The first step, and I believe this is a first step, certainly not a final rulemaking, and this is not going to be the last time we're going to talk about paddlecraft or commercial operators, but the first step in my mind is to create a general permit, and that's exactly what these proposed rules do. Again, as I go through this, you will see the original text of the rule in black, and then you will see strike-throughs and red for places that we have made changes. Those changes, we are going, at the completion of my presentation, we're going to ask you to adopt in the form of an amendment. And I'll try to go through these slowly, and certainly if there are any questions along the way or questions about a specific provision, be happy to take those at the end or take them as we go through. In order to create the permit, we created some definitions, as you can see here. Definition, Waters of Tennessee, comes from statutory language. The definition of commercial outfitter would mean any entity that leases or rents non-motorized vessels for non-commercial use by the public on the waters of Tennessee. We did make some exceptions to who is a commercial, or proposing some exceptions to who is a commercial outfitter. The first comes out of the statute. This would exclude any regulation on commercial outfitters in the U.S. Forest Service or adjacent to the Cherokee National Forest. This would remove the ACOE and some of those other outfitters that are already under a significant amount of regulation over in the southeastern portion of the state. We're also exempting any concessionaire or operator that is operating wholly within the bounds of a state park. This would be because there are state park lakes and T-deck that has some rental boats and things, and we don't want to capture them within this additional regulation, along with any state governmental entity. The last provision there is aimed at capturing, for example, the University of Tennessee. Through their recreation programs that they offer on campus, they actually have some non-motorized vessels that they will lease to students and faculty at a significantly discounted cost. In my conversations with the head of that program at the university, we believe that they're already keeping many of the records that we're interested in getting, and they have offered to share those, so we have exempted them from these rules. You can see the other definitions there. nothing surprising what a public access area is, what a life jacket is. The two definitions there, 7 and 8, we had a lot of discussion. You'll see in a minute there are some requirements for some record keeping surrounding accidents and water rescues. We don't want to capture every time somebody stubs a toe or every time somebody flips a kayak over because they're designed to be flipped over. So we made an attempt to try to only capture those things that are significant. So an accident is any occurrence in which an operator of a commercial non-motorized vessel requires medical attention beyond basic first aid. Somebody needs a trip to the emergency room, we would ask that our outfitters keep that information so that we can start to get a baseline on our safety program and also see if we can improve on that baseline once it's established. Water rescue, again, doesn't mean when somebody flips their boat, doesn't mean when a canoe turns over and scatters items across the river. It requires that if absent intervention, an occupant of a commercial non-motorized vessel would suffer serious bodily injury or death. Operating requirements. As you can see, these have been substantially altered since the initial filing. What these are aimed at doing predominantly is requiring certain information be kept by the commercial outfitters that can be provided to the agency and compiled to give us a better understanding not only of the traffic on our waterways, the traffic at certain public access areas, and also again to retain some of that information concerning accidents and water rescues to give us a baseline for improving on safety. You can see the number and type of non-motorized vessels leased or rented each day, public access and body of water utilized by the non-motorized vessel each day, if known. And the if known is important there. Some of our operators, I've learned, operate and they take their customers to the river, they put them on the river, they know where that customer is going. There are other businesses that rent vessels, and you can go buy these businesses, you rent the vessel, you put the vessel on top of your own private car, and then you go wherever you want. So there are going to be situations where a commercial outfitter might not necessarily know where their vessel is going on any given day. Again, the number of accidents and water rescues are required to be kept, and those records are subject to inspection by the TWRA, and we would ask that the outfitters provide us that any of this required information upon request. The only other operating requirement there that is not directly related towards record keeping is that a commercial non-motorized vessel outfitter shall not lease or rent to an individual less than 16 years of age unless the individual is accompanied by someone at least 18 years of age. You notice we changed from supervised to accompanied. The outfitters brought up the point that once they put them on the water, they really don't know whether that 18-year-old is going to supervise that person that's under 16. So we wanted to limit that requirement to be at the time of rental and not cause any confusion that there was continued supervision required or that the outfitter was going to be held responsible for that. Application to the agency. This is hopefully a form that we will begin, that we will soon craft and make available. This rule contains the information that we want to put on the form and the information that they're required to provide us at the time of application for a permit. As you can see, permits will operate on a calendar year basis. They will all expire on December 31st. We're asking that applications for permits be made between October 1st and December 15th so that we can make sure that those new permits or renewals are issued in a timely fashion and effective by the January 1st begin. The information on the application that we're asking for would be the number of vessels, the waterways, any public access areas the applicant intends to utilize, their estimated months of operations, and then we're requiring some copies of some other things that the outfitters are already required to possess, namely a business license, Department of Revenue certification, a new requirement that we have not had in the past, but I'm told by every outfitter I've spoken to that they all have, is we would like to have proof of liability insurance. That would come in the form of just a certificate of insurance. We don't need to see an entire policy or anything like that. We're asking for a designated representative for the applicant just so that we have a point of contact that we know we can talk to. We made a provision that an operating permit can be transferred upon notification to the agency. We've just asked that the transfer notifications happen before the business actually transfers. As you can see, we deleted 2 significant provisions there relative to permit fees and non-motorized vessel decals. These were both provisions that were tied to fees that we proposed to assess to commercial outfitters. As you will see in a minute, we have significantly altered our proposal relative to fees and thus taken these requirements off of the application. Vessel requirements for commercial outfitters. These provisions, we are asking the outfitters, requiring the outfitters to make sure that they display the name of their business or their company logo on the exterior of their vessels so that we can clearly identify whether a vessel on the water is a commercial or non-commercial vessel. Stand-up paddleboards are somewhat different in that there's not a whole lot of exterior sides, so we put a special provision in there as far as the display of the logo on a paddleboard, just because of the nature of those vessels. We're also requiring that the crafts be maintained in reasonable condition, and we are asking that those vessels be subject to inspection by TWA personnel. Safety requirements and procedures. There was a lot of discussion concerning the safety requirements. Special thanks to the TSRA, American Canoe Association, some of these organizations that have a lot of experience in paddling safety. They contributed a significant amount of comment and suggestion for how we could make these rules as appropriate as possible, and you'll see a significant amount of red in these. And thanks to those organizations, I think we've incorporated, if not all, a significant portion of their requested changes. We're requiring life jackets in accordance with the Coast Guard regulations. In the case of a stand-up paddleboard, again, somewhat unique. There is a requirement for a leash, which is essentially a cord that is attached to the ankle of the operator of a paddleboard. That leash is only required when we're renting or utilizing those vessels on open water, lakes, reservoirs, and ponds. Safety of a leash becomes different in moving water because a leash can become an entanglement. So if somebody's operating a paddleboard in moving water, they shouldn't wear a leash. If they're on a lake, they should wear a leash. And the main purpose of the leash is in windy conditions, if someone falls off the paddleboard, they don't want the paddleboard to get away from them. We're requiring basic equipment for each non-motorized vessel, and we're putting the requirement in that anyone under the age of 12 years and younger must wear their life jacket at all times while in the NMV. This is consistent with our rules associated with motorized boats. These provisions require the outfitters to maintain the life jackets and equipments in good operating condition, to inspect that equipment to make sure before it goes back out on the water that it is in good serviceable condition, and if it is not, certainly in the case of life jackets, they should be disposed of and replaced. We put a provision in here. The commercial outfitters are encouraged, and not required, but encouraged to provide litter bags to their customers. The reason that we encourage it is because there are certain vessels, whether it be inner tubes or stand-up paddleboards, that may not really be able to carry a litter bag with them. Certainly in canoes and kayaks, those would be appropriate, but maybe not in all cases. But we also put in here that we will provide those litter bags to the commercial outfitters upon request. A large portion of the discussion surrounding the safety requirements had to do with the safety briefing. We called it a safety seminar, but we have changed that to briefing, to make sure that it reflects what we're expecting of the commercial outfitters. And as you can see, we have altered it to make sure that those safety discussions are appropriate to the body of water in question. Certainly not all of these things are going to be appropriate or required in every situation, but they're more a list of things that should be considered relative to the vessel, relative to the waterway that a customer is going to go on any given day. All of the safety instruction material and the contents of the briefing, we don't want to box our outfitters in to suggest that there is only one appropriate way to conduct a seminar briefing or only one appropriate way to educate customers on these safety and etiquette requirements. So we will approve those methods, but we don't want to put a requirement that it be done in any one specific way, because there are more than one ways that you could provide this information. Transportation deals with the things that happen on the land when commercial outfitters are transporting their customers, also utilizing public access areas controlled by TWRA. This is not meant to insinuate that we're not going to provide areas, but we want the ability on our access areas that we own and control to designate areas for parking for commercial outfitters. We also requiring that the commercial outfitters, as they're already required to do, comply with all the Department of Safety rules regarding the transportation of passengers and commercial vehicles.
Chris, excuse me, but number one, you says that all parking by commercial outfitters, and then provisions shall not apply to customers of commercial outfitters.
Well, there's some outfitters that do what they call as a shuttle business. And so if I own my own vessel and I take my vessel to the put-in and then take my car back down to the access area on the lower end, there are commercial outfitters that will shuttle that individual back to their vessel at the top. And so from that perspective, that individual is a private person that is not renting or leasing a kayak from a commercial outfitter. They are paying for a shuttle service. So those individuals would not be subject to those parking restrictions. Non-renewal of the permit. Again, this was an area of significant concern from the commercial outfitters, and I think they made a very good case. They, in many circumstances, invest a lot of money and time and effort into their business, and they need some assurance that they're going to be able to continue to operate, whether it comes from needing to secure a loan for new equipment or just the ability to have some assurance that they can continue to operate. We have basically put three things that we could consider for non-renewal, and that would be failure to apply for their permit, failure to maintain the information and documentation required in the operating requirements, which is the record keeping provisions that we have, and again, D is also if we request them to produce some records and they fail to do that, that could be grounds for non-renewal of a permit. Those are the only circumstances where a permit might not be renewed. Here is the most significant revisions that we made. In the initial rule filing, we proposed 3 separate fees: a general permit fee, which we are now proposing that we omit in its entirety, a vessel inventory fee, which we are proposing we omit in its entirety, and a public access launch fee, which we are proposing to omit in its entirety. With that explanation of the proposed rule, Mr. Chairman, I will be happy to address any questions the Commission has.
I'm sure you'll have some. So I take that in the form of a motion. I'm sorry, I need a motion to approve. Motion from Commissioner Box. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner Stroud. So I think we'll have much discussion from the Commission with these recommendations you're making. I'll go first. In a nutshell, we're not addressing the problem. If we don't have fees, we're not going to be able to address our problems. And you called it an issue, I would call it a problem. We're at the point where I don't think anybody has swapped punches, but we've had pushing and shoving, and this has continued to grow. I was first made aware of this 4 years ago with the very first issue when I came on the commission, and it's been the most common complaint I've had the entire 4 years. And I'll use the Caney Fork, not that I'm beating up on Caney Fork, it's just in my area. I've fished it, I've waded it, I've floated it, I've been a customer, and so I'm more familiar with it. And that's where I get the most complaints, being in Middle Tennessee, so I'll use that for an example. When you pull up there to the dock, to the boat ramp, we have two user groups, in my opinion. We have our customers, and we have those that are not our customers, and from the agency perspective. And as discussed previously, we are funded predominantly through sales of permits, license, excise taxes, all that's tied to a license or a permit, as well as fuel tax funding, marine fuel tax. And again, as we mentioned a while back, a few minutes ago, that's from motorboats. So we have the non-customers who are not paying a fee to be there. To make it worse, they're obstructing the customers from having access to what they've paid for. And to make it even worse, at this point we have rules that it's illegal to use our ramps for commercial use, and we've been tolerating that because we want people to use the river. You have the right to be on the river. We want as many people enjoying the river as we can. The problem is just we have too many folks. It's a congestion issue, and we need to deal with this. And so the thing I'm struggling with, I put myself in the outfitter's place, and I'm thinking, okay, I pay a lot of taxes. I pay property tax. I pay fuel tax on my vehicle. I pay registration fees. I pay sales tax. None of that goes toward the use of the ramp. And yet the fee is what would be needed to help to fund what we need to do. And so you're paying all this money and all these other taxes that don't go to the funding. So if it were me, this is an essential part of my business. I have to have access to the water, and so this is an essential part of that. And for a small fee, I can continue to do business with this small fee. So I'm having trouble understanding why would you not want to pay a fee to have this access that you have to run your business. So having said all that, I've discussed sort of the Caney Fork, but I know there's many different situations around the state. We have different rivers, we have different lakes, and there's so many variables to this that I know you can't apply the same thing to each body of water. And other issues are going to be needed as well. Maybe segregation of the river, maybe days of use by different groups, but that's for a later day. So I'm frustrated by what we're recommending. I understand why we need to consider this, because we do need the data. We need to know, to answer these questions, the differences between all these bodies of water. So we need to know the answers of what are we going to do based on how many boats are in the water, how much conflicts there are. So, I don't like it, but I understand that we need to consider this. I also understand that this is just the first bite at the apple. There's much more that needs to be done. And we will be coming back with more. But any other comments from the commission? Commissioner Gardner?
Yes, sir. I too have concerns about the paddlecraft congestion ramps that fishermen and other of our customers are trying to use. I echo Jeff's concerns, but really, when it boils down to it, you got to have the data to support your request. So I understand why we're here and why this bill is, and I support the form that it's in. I am concerned about how we're going to ensure that the data we receive is full and complete data, and I would like you to address that if you could, about what are we going to do to make sure we're getting the data that we're really looking for.
Sure. Just so I understand your question, I assume you're talking about the record-keeping requirements on number of trips, number of vessels,
Absolutely.
public
Compliance
access.
to our request for data.
Well, I can tell you, Commissioner Garner, my experience with the outfitters that I've had the pleasure of dealing with, I have complete confidence that if these rules are passed and become the law of the land, they're going to comply. That being said, I recognize the concern that there could be some outfitters somewhere that just say, well, how are they ever going to prove that how many I put on the water? Well, I can tell you that our law enforcement guys are pretty good, and our law enforcement guys have the ability to surveil. We can put cameras on our access points. We can put cameras on the river. We can put undercover agents out to count boats. If we see through those enforcement efforts that there are inconsistencies with the records that the commercial outfitters are providing us, that failure to provide the information is grounds for non-renewal of a permit. So the repercussions of not accurately reflecting that data or intentionally not accurately providing that data are significant. And I have a lot of confidence in our law enforcement ability to keep a close check on those activities.
All right, thank you very much.
Commissioner Stroud.
All right. Yeah, I think, Chris, that the word can should be changed to the word will. We will watch. We are going to be on this. And I suggest for our commission that we look at this data, or that we look at this every time we meet, every month that we're together. Because the way this thing is working, and I seconded the motion to do this, I think we're in good shape the way we're looking at it right now. But I think there's a lot of slack that we're allowing in this because we just don't know enough about it, and we're trying to be fair. And we're asking the other side, these outfitters, to be fair also. So they need to understand that there may be changes, and it'll come sooner than later, because we're not going to let this thing slide. And we've had so many problems with this situation that it's our responsibility as a commission to fix this as much as we can, and we're going to. So I guess it's, for me at least, it's putting everybody, us included, on notice that we are starting to act on this, which is a good thing. But I think also everybody that's involved in this needs to understand that this is going to change, and this is a start. And I believe that as we get this data, like Dennis is talking about, that we need, it is going to change. And I'm going to make sure, for me at least, that we stay on top of this thing, so that anytime we have a shot at fixing things or making things better, and if we hurt feelings or whatever, it's just going to be. Thank you.
Commissioner Holbert.
Mr. Chairman, I would definitely echo your concerns, and Commissioner Stroud's as well. And being a small business owner myself, I understand fees, but I also understand that if it's a fee that's going to help my industry and help my business down the road, that honestly, I would much rather pay that than I had some other fees that don't. And that's the way I look at this. It's an opportunity for the outfitters to actually, they're just reinvesting in the resource that they're using. It is actually absolutely what it is. But anyway, with that aside, I'm going to offer up an amendment to the motion that we accept the agency's recommendations for now on this. So I'm going to offer that up as an amendment.
Do we have a second? Second from Commissioner Woodson. All in favor? Oh, well, discussion.
Wait,
I'm sorry.
discussion on the amendment.
Discussion on the amendment.
What are we amending?
We're amending.
Commissioner Cox, if I could, just so for staff, so that I can restate, so I can make sure we're clear on what Commissioner Holbert has moved. The original rule filing was put forward to you including a significant amount of revisions in red and strike-throughs. And my understanding of Commissioner Holbert's motion is that he has moved to amend the original filing of the rule consistent with the proposal that I just made. Is that correct, Commissioner Holbert?
Yes.
And we'll discuss that. We'll continue to discuss that. So any discussion on amending the rule as written, as presented? Commissioner Woodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to, just for clarification, the proposal that Chris just walked through and explained is 100% reflected in the amendment that Commissioner Holbert is proposing. So I know that's what Chris just said, but everything that he just walked through included the amendment language. And so just so there's not new information, it's not a change from what has been presented by Chris Richardson today. And as information for folks who may be watching at home or folks who've slept since we last met, because there are so many timing requirements on how many days preceding the commission hearing a rule, there's a lot of time in between the filing of a rule and when it's heard by commission. And there have been countless individual meetings with the public and the agency, advisory visits. A lot of work has taken place, and the product of that work, I think, is what the agency's presenting in total. And I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. We're not, this isn't a change from anything that's been discussed today thus far, and it's also reflective of a tremendous amount of conversation from members of the public, sportsmen, user groups, commercial providers, the agency, and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Woodson. Yes, what we're changing is the original rule, and what has been presented are amendments to the original rule. And that's what Commissioner Holbert is asking us to approve. And so now we have a second on that, and we'll continue to discuss this amendment. Commissioner Wood.
Chris, you said that if some... I'll talk loud. If somebody is out of compliance, not turning in these records and everything, you said the repercussion could be not renewing their application.
Correct. If you look back at our rule on non-renewal, both provision C and D are grounds for non-renewal would be a failure to maintain the information and documentation required in the rule above, which is the operating requirements for number of vessels, use of public launches, all those things that I outlined.
What I guess where I'm going with this is, if let's say we have one that's not turning in these records and everything, and I know we're going to have our officers out there checking them regularly and all that, if each month they go by there and they're not doing it, and at the end of that year they want to come, all right, I'm sorry, I'll do it next year, blah, 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 should we have some kind of a 60-day grace period or something? If you have not turned this in 60 days, we're going to go ahead and stop you right now. Instead of giving them a free ride for a year of not doing none of their...
Yeah, unfortunately, Commissioner Woods, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how you characterize it, but we did not have the authority for revocation of a permit. Okay. Our authority ends at issuance, and therefore non-renewal is our grounds.
I understand. All right, thank you.
Commissioner King.
Is there a minimum of kayaks that are considered an outfit? Are they considered an outfitter? They have their own docks, they have their own boat ramp, they have their customers that just want to get a kayak, and they probably have 15. Are they considered an outfitter? Will they have to fill out all these forms and all that?
Yes, they will. Any business that leases any non-motorized vessels, leases or rents, would be required to obtain this free permit and make application to the agency.
And then one observation I had, or something that might be considered the paddle crafters, if we can encourage them, even by what they've heard here, that how we're funded. Maybe a lot of them did not know that. Maybe it's education. I knew nothing about paddle boating, so I'm learning that. The paddle boaters are learning more about our agency, so just among themselves to encourage each other, you buy fishing license. That money, you don't have to fish or hunt, but that money is used to help the waterways, also the boating, all those things. So, you know, just get online and buy a local program, a hunting license or fishing license that helps fund what you like to do also. Just a comment.
Mr. Cox, you have a comment?
Yes, sir. Not. Oh, excuse me. I don't want to repeat what you said or whatever. While I agree with it, it's disappointing to me that part of our job is to basically referee user groups for the use of the resource, and the agency and this commission over time, I would argue, does a pretty doggone good job of that. I think the polls show that the agency's got a north of an 80% approval rating for management of these resources. It's disappointing that after all of this negotiation, which could have been avoided had the outfitters acknowledged that they are causing a problem at the ramps and tried to do something proactive to allow our fishermen access, we wouldn't be here. But that didn't happen. So we've got fishermen that wait 2 hours to get in the river. Their boat fees are paying for our ramps. They're by a license. They pay the same taxes every day that all these outfitters pay if they're in business. If they're not, they don't pay the business taxes. Where we are now with this rule, we're not solving our fishermen's problem. We're going to get data for a year, and then we're going to talk about it some more, and then we're going to negotiate fees. The outfitters went to the legislature, and while we have ultimate respect for the elected officials, and they are the final say, it puts us in a position now of not having a vehicle to solve the problem, which is more space for everybody. Expand parking, expand the boat ramp access, expand those things, cost money. And right now, the non-motorized vehicles are not paying their way. And they want to use our boat ramps somebody else paid for and pay nothing. And it fires me up when somebody wants to use our property and the natural resources of this state and not pay their share. So where we are now, our fishermen are still going to sit on the ramps while we collect data and do the dance. And I'm not sure, and I've talked to our legal counsel, whose opinion is that it takes a rule for us to manage these boat ramps as far as who uses them, the times they use them, whether paddlecraft non-registered boaters can use them at all. And I respect them. They say that it takes a rule. I would prefer that we get a confirmation of that from the Attorney General's office to make absolutely sure we can't do it by proclamation. I would propose that we close our boat ramps to non-motorized vehicles that aren't licensed craft, or limit their access to after a certain time of day. Let our fishermen have from daylight till 9 o'clock or 9:30 in the morning, and then from 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock. So non-motorized, non-paying craft can only use it from 9 to 3 on our ramps. Our fishermen have gotten no relief with this. So what are we doing? This has been going on for 5 years. So and I'll apologize for ranting, but I don't, in deference to our fishermen and our paying customers, we're not doing anything, nothing, but talking about it. So, and I don't think there's anything we can do today. We can pass this rule, and I'll support it, but we're not doing anything for our customers to give them relief to use our boat ramps to get in the water to fish.
Commissioner Cox, I fully agree. And you, just for clarification, you are not making that as an amendment. You're just stating that's
No, it's not an amendment. I just request, without objection, to confirm our very able counsel's opinion to make sure we can't do it by proclamation because it's so much easier. In the meantime, if we have to do it by rule, then we have to go, it takes 8 months or something like that, and without a fee, we can't expand the ramps, we can't expand the parking, and we can't share the use of the resource like we do with small game, big game, commercial fishing, crappie fishermen. Commercial fishermen have to be off the water so the crappie fishermen won't get tangled in their nets. Shared user groups. We're not able to do that with this group. So our only option is to exclusively use our ramps for our fishermen until something else is done. But we're not helping our fishermen, so it's a little unnerving to me.
I fully agree, and to add to that, I would highly encourage our sportsmen, fishermen, to discuss this with their representatives. In a representative democracy, that's how it works. So they need to hear that is what it is a concern, and we have far more sportsmen than we have paddlecraft operators, and so they need to be heard if that's what the people want. So, any other comments from the commission?
Yes. Personally, I support the right of everybody in Tennessee to use the waterways. It's a public source and so forth. I do agree with Commissioner Cox's comments about the fact that our fishermen and our PR funds are the ones who actually provide the access at these boat ramps and so forth. They pay, of course, the outfitters and the paddlecraft users pay the same fees or taxes that we use. But I just wanted to reiterate that I do agree with Commissioner Cox's comments 100%. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Swan. Commissioner Sanders.
Real quick, and I will say I do agree with I guess all the sentiments I've heard up here. And I will say I received much more unique emails, unique being the key word, not the form emails we got flooded with, but unique emails from fishermen that were frustrated and wanting to see something done. So much like Commissioner Cox, I'm kind of disappointed that we went through this dance for all this time and have gained nothing. Now, I do have a couple of quick questions. You said something which I don't know who's going to answer this. We can't revoke our own permit that we issue? I'm confused. How we issue it, but we can't revoke it. I understand the non-renewal. I get that. If we can't, who can?
A judicial revocation would certainly be an option.
Okay.
But there is no, without setting up, essentially we would have to have administrative law judges on staff and have an entire procedure for revocation, to have a hearing to decide all of those factors, which is not provided in the statute and we don't have in place.
So even if there was a process, we would more likely run to the non-renewal period.
Correct.
Secondly, one of the non-renewal things which seems to be missing, and a key part of what you have presented, is there's nothing to non-renewal if they have an egregious safety record. There are some people out there, and I'm not going to call them out publicly, that are not operating as some of the people that you've been dealing with. And if they've got a bad safety record, maybe it gets called in the non-reporting, but maybe it doesn't. But I would think that even if we revisit this rule, that if they do have a bad safety record, because safety is important.
It is.
If someone goes in and drowns, we're out there looking for them, as well as other emergency responders. So if someone has a bad record, and I understand responsibility, but then they should be held responsible for not doing the safety briefing, I think is the correct word.
Certainly, Commissioner Sanders, if we have a situation where an outfitter is intentionally not providing the safety briefing, intentionally not providing life jackets, and intentionally not providing the proper equipment, if our officers can make that case, there will be a criminal citation issued, and they will be brought before the General Sessions judge. At that time, I would count on our judicial system. If there are egregious safety errors that are repeated, I would think that judge would certainly consider revocation of a permit.
You just brought up one other question I have, and then I'll stop. If I'm out on a rented paddlecraft without the proper safety equipment, am I getting the ticket, or is the operator getting the ticket?
It would depend on the circumstances. Both the operator and the outfitter could be subject to those requirements if this rule passes.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanders. Commissioner Woodson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to offer a few thoughts related to, I think, what we all feel is frustration because of the timing, because of our desire to solve issues for all of the user groups, and particularly our sportsmen and fishermen who are trying to access waters that their license provides them the opportunity to do. And so, one, certainly share my colleagues' frustration. I think just for a point of clarification, and I serve Middle Tennessee as well in the 5th District, and whether it's the Caney Fork or others, there's serious issues, and I do want to be clear with this amendment that's being proposed. The statement was made earlier, again, share the frustration that we aren't solving the problem for fishermen. Absolutely, that's true. The original proposal didn't either. And the fact of the matter is we've got a very serious issue, and we've been working really hard this year to solve it under this chairman's leadership. The original proposal, however, was relatively arbitrary in how the fees were set. It was a best guess by smart people within the agency on what it would take to manage and begin the process of solving issues. But it was arbitrary. And I think that's really important, making arbitrary decisions, and I think they would be too. So there's a wonderful proverb about sometimes when we go slower, we get to our destination faster. And so this is the first year in earnest we will be able to, if this passes, to receive information that will help inform what it will take to be problem solvers on these waterways. And what we've learned in this year, not for 5 years, but this year, what we learned across the state is each one of these waterways is unique. There are unique users, there are unique sportsmen, there are all kinds of important and diverse differences between these waterways. And the communities that are impacted are unique. And so when this process began, there were several members, whether fishermen, user groups, representatives of citizens across our state and the General Assembly who said, golly Moses, we want to be a part of solving this problem, but we're really uncomfortable establishing fees that are arbitrary. We're conservative from a fiscal perspective. We want to be thoughtful, and any time government establishes and sets fees, it's rare, if ever, that they reduce themselves and they are lowered. It is almost always the case that they are set and they eventually, as we did shortly ago, they go up by at least the CPI unless there's a ceiling on it. And so let's really be sure that the amount of money we're going to charge, and I think it's appropriate that this is the vehicle that we would do, that we would utilize to make sure that these user groups are participating in resourcing what's occurring on this precious resource. I think that's really important. I just think we ought to have information to help inform that decision. And so this has not been easy. It's not been easy for anyone. It's not been easy for this commission to grapple with, not for the agency, all of the different user groups. But I just, and I will say earlier, the comment was made that we hope that this comes back again. I have had the privilege of serving on this commission for 6 years. It is my full expectation and my request for the commissioners who will be serving, this has to come up again. The purpose of this reasonable compromise is to receive information to understand what do those fees need to be. What are the solutions in these unique waterways? We shouldn't be sitting on our hands just waiting for information to be filed. There are incredible conversations that can happen right now to understand what on each of these waterways needs to occur to make sure that we are problem solvers in a timely fashion for the citizens that we serve. And so I know we're all frustrated. I'm frustrated too, but I just want to be really clear with the folks that we all serve that neither proposal solved a problem. But we are beginning to solve the problem. We're going to have a lot more information as conservative stewards of both fiscal and natural resources to have the right answer, not just an answer. And that's why I support this amendment. And again, we'll do everything I can as a private citizen to help this commission in getting the right data so that we can, as quickly as possible, and you can as quickly as possible, make a decision, because the chairman of this commission was absolutely right by bringing this to the fore during his leadership and to get us to a point where we're actually solving problems. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Woodson, and as usual, extremely well stated, and thank you for that. So, any other comments from the commission? Any comments from the public? Please. Oh, I'm sorry.
Jeff, let me, as you walk, for Jamie, I assure you, and you know what, you're right, and I'm not going anywhere, and you guys are, and I hate that, but just know this, what I said a while ago, I mean, this is not going to be something that we're going to slow walk or we're going to not pay attention to. I'm adamant about it. I agree with Bill. Things are going to change and things are going to get right, but we have to have the right data, and I'll shut up now, but just know that, feel comfortable, Jeff, and everybody that's not going to be here. We are going to make sure that this is dealt with. Jeff?
We're in great hands, and I know that will happen, so thank you, Commissioner Stroud. Any other comments from the commission? Andrea, please.
Can I ask for a point of clarification before we begin public comment?
Sure.
With the changes in the timing that are proposed, can you all explain how year one would work? Certainly. Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to ask my question before we begin public comment. I'm Andrea White. I'm with the Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association. I'm also the state director for the American Canoe Association. That is the national accrediting agency for kayak and paddleboard and canoe instructors. We are a major force in safety in paddle sports in this country. And I want to thank you all for allowing us to participate in this process so openly and participate in the safety edits. I do want to ask this one point of clarification with the new timing that was proposed in the red line version, which is the first that most of us have seen that. How would this permitting process and enforcement process work in year one? It proposed an application period starting in October, but the law clearly would go into effect in July, right? As you might imagine, for a lot of these outfitters, July 4th weekend is a massive hit in their business. So anything that's going to go into effect July 1st or sooner could have a huge impact on a small business. So I know they're going to have questions and may want to incorporate in their public comment concerns about year one.
Chris.
If I could address that, certainly, Andrea, as you heard through many of the discussions of the small council, we were talking about under the original filing, we were talking about an effective date of July 1 with a delayed implementation to 2020. By removing the fees from this proposal in their entirety, we are no longer bound by a July 1 effective date. This rule, if the commission passes it without fees, would go into effect just like any other rule that they would adopt. Essentially, after the vote today, we would prepare the rule to reflect their action. We would submit that to the Attorney General. There is not a firm timeline for the Attorney General's review, but upon receipt back from the Attorney General, we would then file with the Secretary of State. This rule would go into effect 90 days following that. So essentially, you could have this rule in effect somewhere within 120 days or so from today. Certainly, we are not going to go out and write tickets or start enforcing these provisions on day 121. My anticipation would be that we would provide a 60-day grace period from the effective date of this rule to receive applications. And then we would still, but the intent and a significant difference of this rule, as you point out, is we are going to be able to start gathering data this year and not be waiting until 2020.
So any public comments? Yes, sir. And if anyone else would like to speak, as this gentleman's finishing up, if you would come forward.
Hello, Commissioners.
My name is John Maddox. I own a small company in Franklin, Tennessee called Paddle Dog Adventures. I've been fly fishing for my entire life, or at least from 9 years old, so 35 plus years now. And I'm a little conflicted too, because the side of me that wants to be fly fishing and out on the river also feels the same frustrations that you and your constituencies feel as well. But as a purveyor, a livery for putting people on the river in Franklin, on the Harpeth and the West Harpeth, I'm not facing any of these issues that you're claiming are happening on the Caney, on other parts of the Harpeth, and other areas across the state. So your level of frustration is different from mine, because I'm seeing that a government organization is now coming in and adjusting my business. Mr. Sanders, I think you had said nothing is gained with these rules because we're not applying fees. You are gaining something. You're going to be gaining data in this next year. You're also affecting my business in that I now have to report information that I have gathered anyway, but now I have to report and could potentially not be renewed for my business if I don't report it accurately. So that is impacting me and frustrating me. I'd like to leave you with 4 questions. 4 simple questions. Are you gathering the right data to define your problems? Are fly fishing guides keeping similar records that you are going to require of us? I suggest that they should. That way you have both sides, both sets of data about usage on the river. You're addressing the commercial users of the river, those of us who are guides that are livery services. What about the non-commercial people who are using the river en masse? As Andrea mentioned, the 4th of July is a huge weekend. So is Memorial Day, so is Labor Day. We are not the only, as you're saying, bad actors, or implying bad actors in this case. And really, among the 9 years that I've been on the river, working in Franklin on the Harpeth and West Harpeth, my customers aren't the bad actors that you're talking about, so I'm not experiencing this problem. Last question.
1 minute.
Thank you. Last question. When we as commercial outfitters begin paying TWRA for public access, I'm going to repeat that, public access to a public resource, when we begin paying you, we become a new group of stakeholders, just like your fishermen are. Are you as a commission prepared to defend our needs as well? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else from the public?
My name's Ed Greer. I'm a commissioner of Cheatham County, 6th District. We have about 30 miles of river, Harpeth River, about 18 miles that's heavily used by outfitters. Our county commission passed a resolution in December supporting you guys. We support this rule. We need you. It's been a long time coming. But I have some concerns with the funding, just the same as you guys. I'm asking if you start it, see it through, and it's going to be a long battle. There's a couple of things that the non-markings of the boats, the non-identification of the boats along the river. We have a problem on Harpeth River with landowners and people on the water. Confrontations between landowners, and a boat not being marked is just asking for disaster. It's going to happen. It's already happened several times. That's one thing we support you. We need you. It's a good thing. That's Ed Greer as a commissioner. Ed Greer is a hunter and fisherman. I resent the hell out of paying $29 for a boat registration, a hunting and fishing license, and an outfitter can put in 300 boats and not pay a penny. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greer. We've had 2 speakers, and there's our issue right here. This is it. Both of you make excellent points, and that's what we need to figure out. And that's the point of collecting the data, just as Commissioner Woodson discussed the proverb of getting to the right place at the right time. Any other comments from the, yes, ma'am?
Good morning. My name is Leanne Logan. I'd like to introduce myself and make a statement. I'm representing yet a third community, which is private boaters. All of us share a lot in common. I heard some good things said today. I heard we all want people on the river. I think that was a comment by Chairman Cook. We all want safety. I'm really glad to hear that bubbling up and being an important issue that we're rallying around. And I'm a researcher. We all love data. So starting at a place where we're getting the right information from the right people to be able to inform decisions down the road makes good sense. I represent the Bluff City Canoe Club. I'm a six-year advisory board chairperson, so that's West Tennessee paddling aficionado. I'm also a member of the Wolf River Conservancy and a guide there. I paddle a lot in Tennessee. I paddle around the U.S., and I've worked in 4 countries. I paddle around the world. So getting this right in our backyard is really important. So thanks for listening and sharing good ideas. My recommendation is that we continue to partner together to do good things, to find the right information, to make the right recommendations, because they impact all of us. They impact the fishermen, they impact the outfitters, and there's a potential that it will impact private boaters down the road. I heard that this is just the start, so a door is opening. Let's get it right from the start. I'm encouraged, Chris, by your partnership with speaking to outfitters, speaking to private boaters, working with ACA and TSRA to get the language and the wording right, and to rally around some of those core values of safety, getting people on the river, and doing it in a responsible way. A few things that I want to suggest are important as we go forward, that we not just use our best guesses. So I appreciate Ms. Woodson's comments that let's just not pick numbers out of the air. Let's do this thoughtfully. Let's work together with the people who do use those rivers and access ramps. These are public access places we're talking about. So let's make sure all of the public has access to these and continues to. So I open the door to be part of the conversation with private boaters as we move down this path, and to work the right way to get this right information. So thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing your thoughts as we go forward and doing it in a right and a responsible way.
Ms. Logan, may I ask you a question?
Please.
And I asked Andrea this a few months ago, and this is beyond the scope of our discussion today, but just want to at least discuss it. I'm sorry, the gentleman from Paddle Dogs, your name, I didn't. Mr. Maddox. So Mr. Maddox raised the question as well of non-commercial paddlecraft. What's your feeling on fees for non-commercial paddlecraft?
Good question. I don't have all the answers either. I do know that if we're to go that path, we'll need to be thoughtful and gather that insight from a wide variety of voices to get there. I'll say, in talking to some of the folks around me from the paddle community of late, that should we get there, those values are important. There's not, we all want access to those rivers, we all want ramps to be available, and we want better safety on the river. So there's a potential that we could be supportive of that if it's done administratively, safely, wisely, with the partnerships, with the right funding in mind. It can't be very much. Down the road, we'll have to come back around and talk to that. We want it to be done well, and we don't know what those answers are yet, so I think it's a long path down there. I'm not advocating for it, but there's a possibility that we too are supportive of doing the right thing and getting on the river and doing it safely.
Well, we're 2 for 2. I didn't hear no on either one of them, so thank you. Anyone else from the public? Yes, Nathan.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'm Nathan Ridley. I work at the Nashville law firm, Bradley, Arent, Bolt, Cummings, and I'm pleased today to be here on behalf of the Tennessee Paddle Sports Association, a group that's newly formed. It's a trade association of paddlecraft operators. So it's a new, Commissioner Cox skillfully noted that this group is good at managing user conflicts. We didn't realize we were supposed to be before you. I mean, nobody paid a boat registration fee in 1961 because the fees were not in place to regulate the process. So we're new to the game.
But we're pleased, we're grateful to be here today and for this opportunity to make just some brief comments. We've already, the law firm's already submitted a letter to your staff that's in your file. Just a few things, a little bit of legislative history. The bill that sort of got all this started was filed in 2017, again, Commissioner Cox, as a study process, and Chairman Cook to direct the agency to study in coordination with TDEC and then send the reports of all people to the Commissioner of Tourist Development. That was in 2017. That bill passed in our state Senate, died in the House. And Ms. Woodson knows this as a former legislator. He was in the Black Hole Committee of the House. It was the Finance Subcommittee. And then in the next year, the amendment was rewritten to work on the language that we're working on right now that y'all have studied before, and actually took effect on the 1st of July this year. And the legislature is presumed to know what the law is, but the conversation, I believe, it was an initiative, I think, of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. So that's how we got to where we are. And until the 1st of July, we never, I mean, I understand the tension is that the water is a resource, and all of y'all have mentioned this. Everybody knows that the water belongs to everybody. The tricky part is, how do you get on it? How do you access the water? So, and that's where the conflicts come up. Not at every ramp that you have, or not at every boat access site, but at some. And it's sort of a, yes, ma'am, sorry.
Or if I can interrupt Nathan just a second. I talked to Nathan beforehand, and I knew he was representing a very large group, so I told him to, if he needed a few more minutes, because you're representing a big group of people, we want to hear what you have to say.
There's a bunch of them here.
Oh, great. Oh, okay. Well, then, if they want
to say hello, but they told me to preach a little
bit.
So,
all right.
If you would, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. So we're new to the game. We're new. We have not been subject to regulation by the Commission before. So the feelings back here behind me to my left, they get their feelings hurt a little bit. We didn't know we were supposed to do that. But I do understand, and be sensitive to the fact also that it's come up before, the rule only affects, and the statute only affects, commercial outfitters. So if I go put my kayak in on the ramp and I sit there 30 minutes and smoke a cigarette and have a Coca-Cola and think about what I'm going to have for lunch and back up the fishermen, no impact on them. So that's a pinch point too that'll still be there, but there might not be the political will to deal with that. Because you almost get to the point, Commissioner Cox, you'd want to solve the conflict, but our legislative friends might say, well, you know, Ridley, that's sort of like putting a tax on a bicycle. You know, and we don't do that to non-motorized motor vehicles on our highways. So y'all got, this is hard, this is complicated. As a lawyer, as a law nerd, this sort of is interesting to me because you have a host of layers. You've got federal law that affects this. We have to follow Coast Guard regs. We have state law now that affects this. Some of our outfitters are regulated by local governments and pay a fee for local government access on for example, Old Hickory Lake here in Middle Tennessee. But I talked about the legislative process, and I know y'all are frustrated with that. I appear before a lot of boards and commissions, and sort of as a lawyer, my feeling about the legislature is a little way like I am about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's not of the United States of America. They're not always right, but they're final. And for y'all, that's sort of the way the legislature is. Y'all have been granted authority to regulate resources that we all share together here in Tennessee, but then the legislature can sometimes ride in and call trumps, to use a bridge play, a card playing term. And that's frustrating to y'all, but they have different constituencies too. So just not to be a civics preacher here a little bit, but it's sort of three, Chris and I have talked about before, it's a little bit like three-dimensional chess sometimes. It gets complicated. So be patient with us. I see this as a process, not an event. I share some of your frustration, and some of the folks I work with share your frustration. But Ms. Woodson's point, I think, sometimes it is a proverb. Sometimes we get there faster when we go slower. And also the longest journey begins with a single step. So to me, this isn't the end of it. This isn't the end of it at all, Commissioner Swan. We're just, to me, this process is just sort of getting warmed up, because if Commissioner Cox is going to regulate disputes with user groups, we need to be a user group. We didn't know anything about the legislation, but yet now it's passed and it is what it is, and we're here today before you. We do look forward to working with you. I got just a few little substantive points. I don't want to abuse your time. I know I'm the only thing standing between y'all and going home. So probably the most important, it won't be with this rule, but the most important part for us will be parking. Because you got to access the water. Our customers can't get on the water, and our customers, they don't own their own boat. I mean, this is if you got 4 kids, you want to put them on the water, or a Boy Scout troop, they're not all going to buy their own boat and be exempt. They're going to rent a boat once. So they're sort of users, but they're a little different. But the parking will be key. Parking will be key. Some park systems in other states have adopted a hang tag system or parking access system, and then there would be signage. So you'd say, this lane right here is for commercial outfitters. I'm not familiar with states that have taken the approach of time restrictions. That might be something we could consider. I just hadn't thought about that one, sir. We talked a lot about the 1-year permit. For my folks, this is their business. They're very nervous about that. If you look at what some of the national parks do with some of their outfitters and some of their folks that they regulate, they might have a 5-year permit or a 10-year permit. Something else you might want to ponder is we do it on an annual basis. There's not a reporting system right now. We keep the records and we tell you what we did at the end of the year. And it's not for this rulemaking, but maybe in the future, maybe a regular reporting system. But that might be for the next rule, not for this one. I know y'all want the data. You desperately want the data. I want you to have some data, but your data is my client's confidential business information. How many trips? We put our prices on our website. Many of our customers register for the trip online before they actually get to the river. It makes it easier for everybody. But if I'm down the river from one of our outfitters right now and I go, Ridley did 500 trips that day and I know what he charged, I can cut that price in half and I'll be a great outfitter. And I cut off part of his business. Some state agencies, y'all haven't done this because I know y'all regulate taxidermists and commercial fishermen, but some business entities that have to report information report it under seal. You can do that to the Department of Commerce and Insurance. Some of the insurance groups I work with do that, so you have it, but it wouldn't be an open record. I know I've talked with your general counsel, and she said, Ridley, that's a good idea. We can't do that in a rule. You got to change the legislature to have to change the law to do that. But ponder that, so it would give folks some protection on their business information. Another aspect of that is some companies report information to government agency in ranges that I did 500 trips a day or less than 500 or more than 500. I think that would give you the feel, or more than less than 500, more than 1,000. I think that would give your staff the information that you're hunting for. So ponder that. It gives a little bit of flexibility. I don't want to lose my permit because I did 510. If you come in and look at my records, just food for thought.
Nathan, could I ask you to
yes, sir.
I'm done. Your next few?
I'm almost done. Again, thank you, and I'm remiss in not mentioning your staff. Mr. Richardson, Mr. Moncrief have both been very kind to listen to me. They probably wanted me floating in a lead boat on the Cumberland River several times after all the comments our group has been. I'd also commend to you your counterparts in the state of Virginia. I just mentioned this, Chris, this morning, have done this study. It took them 3 years. They used Virginia Tech. And your counterparts, it's got a funky name. It's the Virginia Game and Inland Fisheries Commission has a draft report out right now on this very issue. Same problem, growing state, booming population. It's a great problem in a way. I mean, Middle Tennessee's carrying, Nashville and the surrounding counties are carrying the economy on its back of this state. And we have a lot of people and they want to go do something on the weekends. And so they want to go get on the water. So, that's it. Y'all have been very kind. I would strongly encourage you, we don't need to do it formally, but the informal advisory panel was very helpful. Chris and I both learned something every time that group met. And it set up channels of communication. So I'm not talking about y'all, I'm talking to you. That was very helpful. I would strongly encourage you. And again, thank you for your time.
We look forward to working with you in the future. We see this as part of an ongoing process.
Thank you, Nathan.
And happy to respond to your questions.
Make some very good points. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir.
Any other comments from the public?
Thank you all. Again, I'm Andrea White with the Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association and American Canoe Association. I've got 3 things I want to say. The first one is thank you. I came to you all in August and representing part of the paddling community, and I asked you to let us be part of the solution. I told you we wanted to partner with you, and you opened up this advisory panel, and we were able to participate in that, and I know that is unusual. That typically the beginning of that public involvement is a public comment period, and I want to thank you all for taking that offer and bringing all these stakeholders to the table. It made a huge difference, and I know that we didn't all still land in the same place on the policy, but the policy proposals and where we are on what we might get out of the end product is so much better than it was when we didn't know who we were talking to or what we were talking about. And I really want to thank you all for opening that up. I think it made a big difference. I'm going to give you a specific example of something you may not know is happening in the background that happened because of that advisory group. We're talking about issues of access on the ramps on the Caney Fork. Well, I'm gonna throw something out there that may be a big aha, I don't know. But canoes and kayaks don't require a boat ramp. Some of the fishing kayaks do because they're so heavy. But if you do it with everybody else, they don't necessarily need a boat ramp. So as the private paddlers who use private funds and private resources to build access points all the time, we're like, well, what if we could help you build a canoe and kayak access on the Caney to deal with some of the congestion on the boat ramp? And so we're working with some of the outfitters right now to try to identify, is there a space, is there a place that would make sense, just topographically, that if we could bring some private funds and some volunteers and we could build a kayak access. We build world-class kayak accesses at TSRA. They survived the 2010 floods. And other people's didn't. So if there's a way that the community can partner together to solve a problem, it doesn't necessarily have to be regulated or legislated. We can all come together and solve the problem, and the group that you all formed started that conversation. So I want to thank you all for that. I do want to offer, and I want to thank Chris specifically, that in the course of this comment period, he asked me to bring in some of the safety resources to mark up the safety language. I think we've got a better reg because of it, and I think that you all will get the benefit of that in terms of the safety briefings, and I want to thank you for allowing me to bring in some of the experts to mark that up. There's one other point that just based on some of the new language I saw today in the red line that I had not seen before, and I want to save you all some time. One of the amendments that was proposed was the exemption of any state governmental entity. And the example was from Trey Knight at University of Tennessee Knoxville Recreation Program. Trey is an ACA national officer on the Safety Education Instruction Council. There are more universities than state universities that are renting out boats. UT Knoxville, UT Chattanooga, MTSU, they all have fleets of boats that they rent out. So does Vanderbilt. So, and so does the town of Smyrna, Outdoor Nashville, Parks and Rec in Nashville, Parks and Rec in Murfreesboro. There are municipal entities. So you're going to hear from them. And I'm going to save you all some time and let you know now that that's an issue. So just for your consideration. Again, thank you all very much for opening up this process. I want to reiterate our request on behalf of all of the organizations I'm here with for an ongoing paddlecraft advisory group. I think we can do so much faster behind the scenes together than we necessarily can do through regulation and legislation. I think we can accomplish real goals that make things better for your fishermen if we work together in an environment like that. And I really want to thank you for the opportunity to do it so far.
Thank you, Andrea. Just to make a comment on yes, the kayaks don't often need a ramp, but they need a place to park their vehicle, so that comes into play as well, just for consideration. So, yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Jim Redwine. I am the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Harpeth Conservancy, which is an environmental group on the Harpeth River and in Brentwood, Tennessee. We our mission is to protect clean water and healthy ecosystems throughout the state. First off, I want to thank you all, commissioners, for the opportunity to speak to you today, and also want to thank Director Richardson. We've been working with him, and he's been very receptive to our comments, so thank you very much for working with us. We look forward to continuing that process. I'm a lawyer myself by training, so we represent several thousand members who use principally the Harpeth River. As you know, this legislation that which we're discussing here today had its genesis on the Harpeth River, and some of the considerable use of that area, particularly the lower Harpeth in the state park area, the Narrows. We worked with Representative Littleton on these issues, so we have significant experience and know what's going on down in that area. I personally also know the Caney Fork as well. We submitted comments on earlier drafts of the regulations, as well as suggested some specific language for your consideration. I wanted to make a couple of major points. First off, with respect to the issue of fees, we offered several suggestions that might be alternatives for the Commission to consider, such as exemptions of certain size operators, scaling, and phase into those fees. Obviously, what we're talking about here is we're talking about licenses for hunting and fishing, taking of a public resource, the actual waterways themselves, the water in them, as well as the fish and game are property of the people of the state in their entirety. So we understand the issues there. We also understand that Commission has to have money in order to run its programs and do its job. The most critical thing we are concerned with is obviously safety and user conflicts. We've seen in the lower Harpeth River a lot of conflict, a lot of overuse potentially, and there's a lot of need for infrastructure, parking lots, trash cans, toilet facilities, and so forth. So that safety and avoiding user conflicts is key. Beyond that, the most critical needs we see here are certainly for data, and we applaud your efforts to collect that data. One of the things that we believe is very important here to try to minimize the conflicts as well as to understand how the resources are being utilized is the real need for recreational carrying capacity, usage capacity studies. And the data that's proposed to be gathered is a good first step. We would urge the agency and the Commission to further that process so that we can understand how we manage areas like the lower Harpeth, like the Caney, like the Buffalo, to avoid these kinds of issues. We also believe that if monies are going to be collected from users, that the bulk of those monies should go back to the rivers in which they're generated, so that they can actually address the problems that are actually that have been generated in those rivers. And we would support certainly a long-term transparent process, budgeting, making sure that the public, the regulated community understands what's proposed to be done with the monies, why certain amounts of monies are being proposed to be raised, and so forth. And we would also support the creation of a paddlecraft advisory board. That is very important to make sure that everybody
1 minute
can have their say-so and be heard on these. And we would look forward to participating in those kinds of boards. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Redwine. Anyone else from the public? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. My name is Billy Davis, and I am with Canoe the Caney. So I know that the Caney Fork River has been mentioned a few times. So I just wanted to come up here and just let you guys know from our perspective that we do hear you. We love that river, and it might not seem that way, but we are a small business, and I've heard some of the stories that have been shared, and they've been greatly exaggerated. Some are true. I mean, there's unfortunately days that the river is extremely crowded, the ramps are not easy to access. We understand that there is a problem, but we're reasonable people, and with working with Chris, we've been a little bit leery because we understand that there's some strife between the two user groups, and I guess what I would just want to assure you is either way this goes, however it gets voted through, we see the problem, we understand it, we've made connections, we've made some friendships, and even with the fishermen, some of the most vocal ones who have spoken heavily against us, I think that they've understood through this process that we do take it serious, and we want to resolve it as well. There's no good day on the river for us if there's conflict. And even if that's not with our user group, if there's conflict on the river and it comes back to our customers, to our employees, to us, that's not a fun day for us either. So we do take it serious. We do hear you. And honestly, I just want you guys to know that our customers are still private people and they're trying to have a good day on the river as well. And I think that this is going to have a lot better outcome than you guys think. So I just wanted to give you some comfort, put a face to the business, I guess, and just let you know that we do hear you and we're going to help you guys make a better situation on the rivers. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Davis, and that's the point of the data. We want to be fair to you as well, and we just need some objective data to make these decisions.
Sure.
So thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments from the public? Mike, would you like to be recognized?
Mike Butler with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to try not to cover points that have already been covered, but we have a couple of things that we'd like to point out and suggest for consideration moving forward. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that I think there is a point of good news here, and that is that despite the conflicts that we're seeing between commercial outfitters, fishermen, all these other folks, we all want the same thing. We want to have high quality experiences on our waters across the state. And I think that's a universal thing that we can keep in focus as we move forward. I think that concept led to us to spearhead a group called the Share Our Rivers Coalition, which over the last several months has generated several communications to this commission. I think all totaled, it's just to give you an indication of how passionate people are about this in the fishing community, it's generated over 43,000 direct communications in the last 3 months. And that can be tuned up even more if it needs to be. The coalition has 320 members. That includes individuals, businesses, organizations across the state. And they are echoing much of what I've heard you echo, is that this is a process, this is a first step. They understand, they don't like the fact that we're not getting to solutions quicker, but they're understanding of the process, and I think that's important. I would say from the Federation standpoint, one of the things that we're concerned about is the resource itself, and there hasn't been a lot of discussion around the water resource. It is a public resource. And like wildlife, one of the two great public resources, it is held in trust by the state. So no one individual owns it. And I think that's a really important concept to remember, because our philosophy is, and I think this is proven across our country in multiple agencies, whether it's the highway departments of our state or whether it's the North American model for fish and wildlife management. The concept that some should pay and others shouldn't is something that we are adamantly opposed to. If you're going to use public resources, then you need to contribute to the health and maintenance of those public resources. If you drive a car, you're doing it every day through your gas tax. If you hunt an animal, you're doing it every day through your hunting license. If you're fishing for fish, you're doing it every day through that fishing license. That concept is proven, it's successful, it works, and we think that it is going to have to be a fundamental aspect of any solution that's going to work long term. Just a couple of other points real quick. I think that we support this as a first step, knowing and hearing loudly and agreeing with many of the commissioners saying we've got to see this through to fruition. I would end with this as a suggestion. As we move towards looking at fees, one of the things that we would ask you to consider is to evaluate these as impact fees, possibly, because the users of the water, everybody that uses the water has an impact, whether you catch a fish, whether you float a canoe or run a kayak, there's always an impact, whether it's because we've got to put in more boat ramps and parking lots, or whether we've got to stock more fish, or whether we've got to clean up more trash. Keeping the focus around the resource. It's the old goose that lays the golden egg. If we protect the goose, we'll have lots of golden eggs. And so that would be our recommendation moving forward to y'all to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone for your comments. We've given us much to consider, and we will continue to work through this. So we have an amendment, and now we're voting to approve the amendment. So we have a motion and a second. So all in favor of approval of the amendment, the rule as amended.
No, keep going. Vote on the amendment first.
That's what I would, so let me restate it. So we have a motion and a second on the amendment. We're now voting to approve the amendment. So all in favor of the rule as amended? No, I'm sorry, the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, let it know by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? So the amendment passes. Now we're voting on the rule as amended. So do I have a?
Could I be recognized, sir?
Yes.
Before you finalize the vote, I just want to thank all of the outfitters, thank all of the members of the Small Advisory Council that put in a significant amount of effort, time to come and educate us. I want to give a special thanks to a few members of the agency staff, General Boyers, Thomas Moncrief, Kim White, Stacy Saxton, Jennifer Wisniewski. I know it's odd for me to have PowerPoints and things, and don't think that I did that on my own. There was a lot of effort that went into this that I wanted to thank them, and also reiterate to the outfitters that are here and to that community, anybody watching at home. I look forward to working with you all on this in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the amendment has passed. Now I need a motion for approval for the rule as amended. Motion from Commissioner Sanders, second by Commissioner Holbert. Any discussion on the rule as amended? Commissioner Woodson.
I had not thought about this issue previously. I'd like to ask Chris a question and wonder if it should be further amended based on new knowledge today. The comments that were made related to the language in the amended version on state universities, can you help me understand why we wouldn't exempt institutions of higher education that are approved by SACS accreditation or something? We don't want to get silly about opening up a huge loophole, but in Tennessee, we typically treat our public and our private. So can you talk?
01 and 2 as amended on non-motorized vessels. Let it be known by saying aye. Any opposed? The amendment passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroud. Chairman Stroud. We have one other thing that I failed to, when we did the approval of the minutes, I failed to get approval for the minutes at our special called meeting for CWD last month. So we did receive those minutes. We have a motion for approval from Commissioner Holbert, second from Commissioner McLaren. All in favor of approval of the minutes from the special meeting concerning CWD, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And those pass. We do have some discussion to continue with the agency concerning, we have no discussing. So commissioners, please stay. We're not adjourning the meeting. We just need to take a recess and discuss another item. What's that? Yeah, Commissioner McLaren would like to say something first before a lot of folks would probably want to leave.
I'd like to talk a little about the SCTP that I fell to earlier. I hate those guys got out on me. As a SCTP coach, I have been able to watch these young athletes grow and do great accomplishments that never would have been available otherwise. Seen kids that had never been on a football team or a basketball team that are now part of a team, and they're doing their sport and they're having fun. They alluded to the rain at the national competition, and I happened to get interviewed on TV, and it was not my proudest moment, but I did notice something there that day that that really stuck out in my mind. There were hundreds of kids out there shooting in the pouring rain, and not once did I hear a grumble or a complaint or, oh, it's raining, or I'm going to get wet. The kids took the line, they shot their shoot, and they stood there and did what they were supposed to. And if that doesn't teach work ethic, I don't know what else will. I mean, I don't know what other sport that you can, that stands up and does some of that, or where those kids would have gotten that opportunity. And with that, I'd like to thank some of our other sponsors. I know we have money that comes in through the Friends of the NRA, and thank you, Mr. Sanders, for that, and also through the Midway USA Foundation. So that was some things that I wanted to thank those organizations for. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McLaren, and Emily's, what a great example of that you're talking about. But there's thousands of kids with the same dedication, and these athletes are amazing. So thank you for that. So we will take a recess and be back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Or let's make it 10 minutes. Let's do 10. 10 minutes. 9 minutes. 12:15. If everyone could please take their seat, and the meeting is back into session. I'd like to recognize Chuck Yost with the Wildlife Division.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to report back from yesterday, and specifically in regards to some of the comments I made about Shelby County. In yesterday's meeting, I shared that because of the sample that was found in Fayette County and its close proximity to Shelby County, that automatically meant that the emergency rule that was passed applies there, and would mean that the carcass exportation restrictions and the feeding restriction would apply there. And I was incorrect in saying that, because that would not be the case until we confirm that that sample was in fact positive, because I'll remind the Commission that we do 2 tests, and the initial test comes back either suspect, positive, or not detected. And in the case where it comes back suspect positive, and it has the potential for changing our regulations, then we need to get confirmation on that positive before we take such action. So with that, we will await confirmation of that before Shelby County would be impacted by the rule. Does that make sense?
I'd like to recognize Chairman Holbert of the Wildlife Committee.
Is there any questions for Chuck? Okay.
All right, I have a little more information I'd like to share, if that's appropriate.
Go ahead.
Okay. There has been some further development since yesterday, and I think I shared yesterday, I certainly meant to, that we are constantly receiving new results. And since we spoke yesterday, we have more results, and some of those are that we had 19 additional suspect positives, and we are currently doing hunter notifications on those, and don't have those details at this point, but that is an update. And I want to remind you that we have still a lot of samples that we don't have results for yet, and we have over 1,000 samples, in fact, from our response efforts that we don't have results from. However, we do have one that is worth mentioning today, and again, this is a preliminary positive and has not been confirmed. But one of those samples could have, and I emphasize could have been in Madison County, but we have not had confirmation on that location, or certainly hadn't had confirmation that it was truly positive. Whenever we get the results from the lab, the first test, when we get those from the lab, we're able to input those into a database, and it gives us the hunter's information in the county that it was checked in at. And we have not had time to contact that hunter. We haven't been able to get in touch with that hunter yet to confirm that county of harvest. So everybody needs to realize that for the sake of transparency, we share that today. However, we've got to confirm that, not only the location, but also, and when I say location, I mean county, but we also have to await final confirmation of that sample. So with that, it may come as a little bit of shock that There is no action required based on this information, and the agency's recommendation is that we stick to the plan, and by not taking action today and waiting final results, that's what we recommend.
Thank you, Chuck, and just a comment on my behalf before I entertain questions. I just want to commend you and others again today. You've been consistent. I think that's the most important thing, is that we're consistent in our decision making, that we treat everything the same, and I think that's important for the public to know. We're not doing anything different. In fact, we're staying right on protocol, and I'm so thankful you guys had this plan in place that was worked on years before, and you guys are following it to a T, and I just want you to know we appreciate it. The hunters, I hope, appreciate it. And I just want to reiterate that what a good job you guys are doing.
Thank you.
So I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Commissioner Stroud.
Chuck, my ignorance here. You got me? I keep telling you, push the faders up and then just mute. It's a lot easier, okay? Chuck, so ignorance here, but as this stuff happens and as you confirm these things, are we getting this every time there's a confirmation? Is the commission being notified? Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Any other questions? Commissioner Sanders?
And this is just me not really understanding, but if we have a positive in another county, does our plan that we've already passed automatically expand to that, or do we have to take further action? And that's, I just don't know.
We would need to take further action as far as if we open seasons or anything like that.
Okay. What, as far as addressing the protocols that we've already put in place? I understand not expanding the season because that's about over anyway. But are there, I guess the plan that we're operating under, does that expand?
Chuck, you want to answer that?
I'm not exactly following the question.
I'm not
Can
either.
you repeat it?
All right, we
Understand, Tommy.
we have a zone in 3 counties that's already in it. You just said that there may be one in another county.
Mm-hmm.
The CWD plan that's in place, does it automatically expand to encompass that new county if it's confirmed positive, or do we have to take further action?
Yeah, I think I can help with that, and I can tell that we're challenged. People are thinking of different things. They're thinking of a plan. Some people are thinking of a rule. Some people are thinking of a proclamation that added a new season. So I'm not exactly sure how to get everybody aligned in talking the same language, but I'll sure try. And the answer is that if confirmed, if the one that was near Shelby County is confirmed, and the one that the one potential in the other county, if those are confirmed and those locations are, and we're confident in those locations, then the rule would apply, which would mean that they would be brought into our chronic waste and disease management zone. And that would not require any action on behalf of the commission. We eventually have to file a permanent rule, is something to note. But in order to have any kind of new deer season there or any changes to hunting, that would require commission action, and the mechanism for that would be proclamation. And in regards to the agency's response in our plan, absolutely, if those are confirmed, then they would automatically be a part of our efforts as far as sampling, and be a part of our program that, or our package, I'll call it, that we'll propose to you all in the future as far as regulations are concerned regarding hunting.
Chairman Cook.
So, Commissioner Sanders, just to, I guess, reiterate, we have a protocol and we are following the protocol. Nothing has triggered the protocol yet, in that we don't have positives, confirmed positives, and one, we don't even know the exact location. So nothing has triggered our protocol at this point, but we are continuing to follow that. And the other good news is we still have 1,000 samples out there. So so important at this phase of where we are is to get samples to try to define the frequency and the distribution. And so we have 1,000 more to look at, so that's all helpful as well.
Mr. Swan.
Chuck, excuse me, how often does a suspect deer come back not positive?
I wish Dr. Grove was here to field this question. It's
okay to say.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking back to when he's been asked that question, how exactly he responds to it. But whenever we get a suspect positive, we're pretty confident that it's going to come back positive. So we're going to plan accordingly because that's what we would anticipate.
Well, then a follow-up question, does it ever come back not positive?
I'm sorry?
Does it ever come back not positive?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Does
Yes, sir.
sometimes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other discussion?
And the more important question in the latter possibility was you're not sure where the animal was harvested, so you have to talk to the hunter wherever it is to make sure where it came from.
Right, right. Because y'all checked in deer to know that there's opportunities for mistakes, and we want to make sure we have all that information. Make sure that it's correct, and have confirmation.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Chuck. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert. So that completes our agenda, and I'd like to again thank the Dale and Nick and all the DU staff. This has been a wonderful meeting location, and thanks everyone at Ducks Unlimited for providing this to us. And any other comments or announcements from the? Oh, one other thing I need to announce: the nominating committee. So the nominating committee is Commissioner King is the chairman, Commissioner Cox, and Commissioner Stroud. Any other comments or discussion from the commission?
Thanks to Lance and Amy Snyder. You guys did a good job with all the stuff you did. I appreciate it. So, Commissioner Cox, thank you for the evening last night. That was an awesome evening. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments from the commission? Director Carter? I should have looked at the date. What's our date for the next? Our next meeting is in Nashville, February 21st and 22nd. So with that, we adjourn.
He's faster than